Picture a city of stone glowing in the early morning sun. Bells, prayers, and birdsong spilling over narrow streets. To three great religions, this place is the center of the world. And between 1095 and 1291, hundreds of thousands of men, women, and even children would march, bleed, and die just to stand where you're now standing in your imagination. 2 centuries, countless lives. One word that tried to explain it all: crusade. But the truth? It was never just one war. It was a storm. We begin in a Europe that feels cramped and hungry. Fields scraped thin. Nobles restless and violent. Knights bred for war with no great war to fight. In November 1095, in a small French town called Clermont, a pope climbed onto a makeshift platform and offered them an answer. Urban II didn't have a microphone, no live stream, no viral thumbnail. He had something more powerful, a story. A story of brothers in the East crying out for help. Of holy places insulted and defiled. Of a road to Jerusalem paved not just with danger, but with guaranteed salvation. Imagine the crowd. Muddy cloaks, iron helmets catching the light, peasants clutching walking sticks, minor nobles with swords at their belts. The air smells of sweat, horses, and damp wool. The Pope promises, take the cross, march to the Holy Land, and every sin you've ever committed wiped clean. A moral reset button attached to a sword. How many people in that crowd had done things they couldn't forget? Soon, a symbol begins to spread like a logo of the age. A red cross, stitched to tunics and cloaks. Not because of branding teams or marketing budgets, but because humans crave belonging. If your neighbor wears it, you're tempted. If your Lord wears it, you're expected. If your priest praises it, you're pressured. Europe buzzes with a strange fever. Sermons sound like recruitment ads. Songs tell of a glittering city that God himself wants back. But holy war looks very different when the marching starts. Picture the first waves of crusaders, not as neat columns of armored professionals, but as chaotic crowds. Farmers, craftsmen, entire families pushing wagons piled with pots, blankets, and babies. They don't wait for proper planning. They charge ahead like a glitchy early access version of the crusade. On the way, the violence spills over its supposed borders. In some towns along the Rhine, Jewish communities become targets. Houses are looted. People are killed. The war for Jerusalem has not yet reached the Muslims of the East, but it has already broken lives at home. Months turn into years on the road. Dust choking lungs. Armor rubbing raw against shoulders. Horses collapsing on rocky paths. The word glory doesn't smell like incense anymore. It smells like rotting meat and unwashed bodies. And yet, the story keeps them moving. God wills it. Deus vult. Finally, imagine cresting a ridge and seeing Jerusalem for the first time. A ring of stone walls. A golden dawn washing over domes and towers. This, the city preachers promised, would shine like heaven on earth. Instead, it becomes a stage for hell. In 1099, Crusader armies breach the walls. The fighting turns into a massacre. Streets run with blood. The holy city, captured in the name of mercy, is taken with astonishing cruelty. This is one of the uncomfortable truths of the Crusades. The gap between the sermons and the screams. Between the imagined purity of a cause and the messy reality of human behavior once swords are drawn. Yet life goes on. On the bones of conquest, new states rise. Small Christian enclaves carved into the eastern Mediterranean coastline. Think of them like fragile outposts, halfway between medieval Europe and the wealthy, vibrant world of the Islamic East. In these crusader states, Frankish knights walk beneath Arabic inscriptions. Western churches watch over markets filled with spices, silk, and sugar. Alliances shift. Some crusaders marry local women. Some Muslim rulers make deals with Christian lords. War and peace, hatred and cooperation, twist together like threads in a woven rug. Meanwhile, in the wider Muslim world, news of this foreign incursion spreads slowly at first. The Islamic world in the 12th century isn't a single monolith. It's a patchwork of empires and dynasties, rival cities and rival sultans. But over time, the Crusades help do something unintended. They create a common enemy. Leaders like Zengi, Nur ad-Din, and, most famously, Saladin rise not just as politicians, but as symbols of resistance. Picture Damascus at dawn, the call to prayer rolling over tiled roofs. Picture Cairo's bustling markets. These are not faceless enemies, but living, complex societies with their own dreams and fears. When Saladin takes Jerusalem back in 1187, he does so under his own powerful narrative. Not as a conqueror drunk on blood, but as a liberator reclaiming a stolen trust. The loss of Jerusalem sends shockwaves back to Europe, and with it, more crusades are called. Kings such as Richard the Lionheart sail east. Battles rage. None of these later campaigns fully reverse Saladin's victory. And yet, the Crusades aren't just kings and fortresses, banners and treaties. One of the most haunting stories doesn't start in a castle or a palace. It starts with children. By the early 13th century, Europe is tired. Crusade after crusade has eaten money, men, and faith. People have seen the gap between promises and outcomes. But the dream of a pure crusade still lingers. The idea that somehow, somewhere, someone absolutely innocent might succeed where hardened warriors failed. Now imagine a small French village in 1212. Morning mist clings to the fields. Chickens scratch in the dust. A boy named Stephen, just a teenager, claims he has seen visions of Christ. He says he has been chosen to lead a new crusade. Not with knights, not with noble armies, with children. Word spreads like gossip on Fast Forward. In taverns and churches, in marketplaces and fields, people whisper, "Have you heard about the boy? They say he can make the sea part. They say he carries letters directly from Jesus to the King of France." Are these rumors true? Probably not. Did they matter? Not as much as the hope behind them. Soon you can picture them. Lines of children and adolescents setting out on dusty roads. Bare feet and worn-out shoes. Wooden crosses hung from necks. Some are truly young. Others are more like poor teenagers, runaway apprentices, and landless laborers, swept up in the tide. Parents weep on doorsteps. Some try to stop them. Others, desperate and devout, let them go, convinced that maybe innocence can succeed where armored sin has failed. The Children's Crusade, as later ages called it, is part history, part legend, part nightmare. Historians debate the exact details, how many were truly children, how organized it was, how far they got. But the image that survives is undeniably powerful. Youth marching toward a miracle that never arrives. Picture them reaching a southern port, exhausted, hungry, and sunburned. The sea is there, yes, glinting under the sun, waves rolling in and out. But it does not part. No dry road appears to Jerusalem. No divine bridge opens. The silence of the horizon is a cruel answer. What happens next in the stories is even darker. Some accounts claim merchants offer to ferry the children for free, and then sell them as slaves. Others insist many died of hunger and disease on the road. Some likely just gave up and went home, their dreams broken but their lives spared. We don't know the full truth, but we know enough to see the tragedy. A generation so hungry for hope that it sends its own young into the jaws of the unknown. The Children's Crusade is the Crusades in miniature. Not in armor, but in emotion. Not in strategy, but in story. It shows how powerful a narrative can be. Powerful enough to make people walk into danger with nothing but faith and a rumor. Meanwhile, the official crusades turn stranger. One holy war is diverted and ends up sacking Constantinople, a Christian city, in 1204. Imagine that. Crusaders, originally sworn to reclaim Jerusalem, looting churches filled with icons, stealing relics, smashing doors in a city that shares their God. The line between us and them begins to blur and twist until it snaps. By the late 13th century, the tide has turned for good. One by one, the Crusader strongholds along the coast fall. In 1291, the city of Acre, the last major Christian bastion in the Holy Land, is surrounded. The sea churns with panicked ships trying to escape. Smoke curls above broken walls. When it falls, it feels like the closing of a book. The age of the classic Crusades is over. So what remains when the banners are torn, the fortresses abandoned, and the songs of glory fade into silence? On the simplest level, graves. Graves scattered from French villages to Syrian hills. Bones beneath fields, beneath churches, beneath forgotten fortresses. Lives spent on a promise that often looked very different up close than it did in church sermons. But something else remains too. Something less visible, but just as powerful. Trade routes that grew busier because of these wars. Knowledge that slipped across front lines along with prisoners and merchants. Europeans coming back with new words, new spices, new ideas. Algebra and astronomy, paper and new medical texts. Books translated from Arabic that preserved Greek philosophy Europe had forgotten. The Crusades were not a simple clash of civilizations, fighting in a vacuum. They were messy contact, violent, traumatic, but also transformative. If you zoom out far enough, the Crusades look like an early, brutal rehearsal for something we still live with today. Global conflict built on stories of good and evil, us and them, chosen and damned. The words have changed. The weapons have changed. But the emotional script feels familiar. Charismatic leaders frame a conflict as sacred. Ordinary people, caught between fear, faith, and social pressure, find themselves swept along. It's easy, centuries later, to point at soldiers in chainmail and ask, how could they believe that killing in God's name would save their souls? But you could flip that question toward us. How often do we wrap our own politics, our own causes, in absolute moral language? How often do we listen more to the story that feels right than to the facts that feel uncomfortable? Now return in your mind to Jerusalem. Today, if you walk its streets, you'll see priests and imams, tourists with cameras, soldiers with rifles, children with ice cream, and pilgrims with tears in their eyes. You'll hear church bells, the call to prayer, and the hum of conversation in a dozen languages. The city is still holy. It is still contested. But it is also stubbornly human. Stand there in imagination, between the stones that have watched armies come and go. Think of the armored knights who believed God rode with their lances. Think of the Muslim warriors who believed the same for their banners. Think of the boys and girls of 1212, trudging toward a sea that never parted. The Crusades were wars for a city, but they were also wars for a story of who owns sacred space, of who speaks for God, of whose suffering counts and whose does not. When we tell that story now, from the safety of our screens, we have a choice. We can turn it into a simple saga of heroes and villains, us and them, righteous and wicked, or we can hold the complexity. Bravery and cruelty on all sides, faith twisted and faith sincerely held, knowledge exchanged in the middle of violence. We can listen for the small voices drowned out by shouting, the villagers, the merchants, the mothers, the children. The Crusades ended more than 700 years ago. But every time a flag is raised in the name of a pure cause, every time an enemy is described as less than human, every time children are told to walk into danger for the sake of a story, something of that old fever flickers back to life. The question is not just what they did in God's name. It's what we might still do in the name of our own holy causes, and whether we're brave enough to question the stories that lead us to the edge of the sea, waiting for it to part.